Amen. Grab hold of your Bibles and say this with me. Say, this is my Bible. I have what it says I have. I can do what it says I can do. I declare this morning, my mind is alert. My heart is receptive. I'll be taught the Word of God. And I'll never be the same again. Open up your Bibles, if you would, to Mark chapter 6. If you're still learning your way around the Bible, then you'll know, and actually, we don't want to go to Mark 6 yet. We want to go, first of all, we want to go to Psalm 91. I got way ahead of myself. Go to Psalm 91. That's in the middle of the Bible. And so it's like right before Proverbs and right after Job. Psalm 91. This was actually, even though a lot of the Psalms were written by David, this was actually a psalm that was written by Moses. And so Psalm 91, he says, when we think about, we're trying to just be clever and talk about things we learned from superheroes. Last week we talked about that one of the things is that they have their gifts. They know what they're good at, and they go and do those things. When they're not using those, they're just common, everyday, normal, and that kind of thing. Just like you and I need to know what our gifts are. But then there's another quality they have, is when you look at so many of them, is that they have a place of just kind of solitude, a place where they retreat to, a place that they hide in, a place that's that's a place of protection and a place of refreshing and that type of thing. And the truth of the matter is that you and I as Christians need the same thing. And I'll just tell you this much. I've discovered this, that all of us hide somewhere. Really, many times our addictions are nothing more than a place that we're hiding in. Many times they're set off by other things. I remember I had a friend that he struggled in an area, and over again, it cost him everything. It cost him his marriage, cost him his ministry, and one day the Holy Spirit, he was in the middle of hiding again in this place, and the Holy Spirit just spoke to his heart, and he said, this is where you go every time you feel less than. And instead of running and hiding in God's presence, this was a place that he went. And so, we have to ask ourselves, where is it that we hide? But God's our hiding place. And so in Psalm 91 verse 1, it says this, those who live in the shelter of the Most High will find rest in the shadow of the Almighty. Those who live in the shelter of the Most High will find rest. Everybody say rest. In the shadow of the Almighty. This I declare about the Lord. He alone is my refuge. Not something else, not someone else, not someplace else. He alone is my refuge, my place of safety. He is my God, and I trust Him, for He will rescue you from every trap. He'll rescue you from every trap. Anything that the devil's trying to set to just grab hold of you, anyone that he may use to try to, just enslave you with something, that God will rescue you from that when He's your hiding place. So He will rescue you from every trap and protect you from deadly disease. He will cover you with His feathers. He will shelter you with His wings. His faithful promises are your armor and protection. So His promises they're our armor and our protection. And so we have to understand this, that it's in that alone time with God that we experience rest. Now, so many times, and I've seen this happen, especially for people, we get saved, we give our lives to Jesus, we hear from the preacher, hey, look, you need to be serving, you need to be doing all these things. And so we step into it right away, and we begin to do all of that. And we volunteer for one thing after another, and we're doing all this good stuff. We're not doing the things that we once did before, but as time goes on, we feel ourselves kind of begin to burn out. We feel ourselves begin to just kind of feel exhausted and just want to separate. How many of you have ever experienced that before? Anybody here? And part of the reason is that so oftentimes that we get caught up in the work of the Lord and spend little time with the Lord of the work. And so you and I have been called to rest in Him. We don't find our rest in what we do. We find our rest in who we connect with. And so one of the things that we're called to do is to connect with the Lord, to spend time with Him. That's the place that we rest. I have this scripture down, and I thought it was pretty interesting. In Exodus chapter 3, Moses was out in the wilderness, and God had called him and was just speaking to him. So there was this bush that was caught on fire. And as Moses turned aside, he saw that the bush was just burning, but it wasn't consumed. Now that's unusual, right? Because if you've got a fire going right now at your house and you put wood in there, it's just going to be consumed. How could this bush continue to burn and not be consumed? And it says this, There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the middle of a bush. Moses stared in amazement through the bush. Though the bush was engulfed in flames, it didn't burn up. Well, the reason is because the fire wasn't sustained by the bush's presence. It was sustained by the Lord's presence. And so for us, one of the reasons why we experience burnout, one of the reasons why we can feel like we get so tired serving God is because we try to do it in our own strength. We try to do it in our own way. And the truth of the matter is that we need those moments where we step aside and just let the Lord refresh us. Just to step aside, in the middle of all your serving, in the middle of all you're doing, in the middle of all of the things, and it's amazing that it doesn't mean that we're doing bad things when we begin to feel exhausted, begin to feel like, man, I just don't want to do this anymore. That so many times it's in the middle of doing good stuff, serving our heart out, trying to be everything for our family, trying to be everything at our job and just, make that business go well, trying to be everything in our community, trying to be everything, for our kids and for our spouse and the people around us, and just reach this place of just exhaustion, like I can't do anymore. And not only do we not do anymore, but we stop doing the things that we were once doing. And it's because somewhere along the line we began to go in our own energy, and you know what? We were never meant to sustain ourselves. So he said in Psalm 91, those who live in the shelter of the Most High will find rest. In your work? No. In other relationships with other people? No. In good deeds? No. We'll find rest in the shadow of the Almighty. So we need that. I need that. You need that. We need to be in that place. And if we don't, then all of a sudden fatigue and even sometimes resentment can set in. That these things, these places, these people that we've done all of these things for, because we love them, that over time we begin to resent begin to resent them. And it's because even though we were well-meaning and well-intended, that we've never stopped to realize that the one that was intended to sustain us is Him. You want to find rest? Jesus said, come to me. Come to me and we get to experience rest. So number one is this, is in that alone time with God that we experience rest. This is how we keep burnout from happening. There are times, man, I just have to set my phone down. I just have to turn stuff off. Just get alone with God and just let Him speak to me. So I'm speaking to my heart. If I don't, I find myself just beginning to be fatigued and just overwhelmed and overcome. But our rest is in Him. Look at number 2, if you would. Go with me to 1 Samuel 22. 1 Samuel 22. You're in Psalms, and 1 Samuel is a few books before Psalms. It's like the ninth book of the Bible. 1 Samuel 22. Now, one of my favorite people in the Bible is a guy named David. And I like him so much just because, first of all, he was kind of a man's man. I mean, when Goliath stood there and he was like, you're not going to talk about God that way in front of me. And they went after it. But also, he was flawed. His flaws were obvious. I can identify with that, that I'm flawed. And yet he had a heart after God, and I'm hoping that's who I am too. And so he had killed Goliath. God had said, you're going to be the king. And yet it was 13 years before he recognized that title. 13 years. And so Saul began to be jealous of him, who was the current king. And so he was after David. He was going to kill him. Well, man, if you're just this shepherd boy with his family and the king is after you and he's got all the resources of the nation, what do? Well, David went and hid. He went to a place called Adullam and hid there. And so in 1 Samuel 22, verse 1, it says this. So David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. Soon his brothers and all his other relatives joined him there. So first of all, he went there by himself. Eventually his brothers and his relatives joined him there. They probably realized, if the king's mad at you, it's not too long before he gets after your family too. And it says, then others began coming. So he's in this cave, and then others began to come. And what they were like, it says, men who were in trouble or in debt or who were just discontented. How's that for a recruiting poster? They were in trouble. Hey, hey, I'm so glad to see you. What brings you here? Well, I'm in trouble right now, and this seems like I heard you were in trouble too. So what are we going to do? And then it says that others were in debt. And back then, when you were in debt, you didn't get harassed by phone calls. I just got to be in a place where I get no cellular reception. These guys will not leave me alone. That's all what was going on here. They'd sell your family. They had debtor's prison. And some of them were just discontent, like, just the way things are going, man, I just cannot handle it anymore. So, I mean, these aren't exactly people that are showing up having won tough guy competitions. It says they were in debt, in distress, and discontent. And so it says, until David was the captain of about 400 men. So it wasn't just a few. 400 people show up to this caved area that are just going through all of these challenges, and they're like, hey, why don't you be in charge of us? And I'm sure he's like, really? I'm a king, and this is my army. Okay. And so later, David went to Mizpah in Moab, where he asked the king, please allow my father and mother to live here with you until I know what God is going to do for me. So David's parents stayed in Moab with the king during the entire time David was living in his stronghold. So his stronghold wasn't a palace, it was this cave that he went into by himself. And, the truth of the matter is that, when you first go into a cave, it becomes a dark place. And for some of you, man, that may be where you're at right now, is that you're in this dark place and you go in there. And maybe the one positive thing that's come out of it is it's driven you and turned you towards God. You may not have done it on your own. And I'm not saying that God put you there. But so many times as we begin to go in these hard places, we feel like we just keep getting moved and moved until we're in this place. And maybe it's not even decisions we've made. Maybe it's decisions somebody else has made. Maybe it's not even has to do with anybody's decision. Maybe it's just the stuff that life is dealing with us right now. And it's not like you did anything bad. It's not like anybody else. It's just life. It's just one of those seasons that you don't get to control how long it lasts. You don't get to determine, the things that take place. The only control you have is what are you going to do while you're there? And so here's David in this dark place, and all of a sudden, these people begin to show up. And as challenging as this place was, as he got in that place and continued to spend time with God, that as we look at his life, that he went in the cave one way, but he came out another. And not only that, but the 400 people that went with him went in one way, but came out another. David, he kills a giant. He kills this great warrior that for 40 days, in the morning and in the evening, had taunted and challenged the children of Israel. And all of these men that were in the Israeli army, that some of them had been battle tested. The king had experienced battle before, that they shook in fear at this guy, and David stood up to him. And this is what I found out about the giants in our life, is that they try to intimidate us, they try to shame us, they try to distract us, they try to get us to pull back. And yet David stood up to him, and as a result of that, he was recognized, and you would think that automatically that promotion would come in, and instead he finds himself in a cave, and all of these people that are just like him, that feel like they've been pressed there because of the circumstances of life, are pushed there. And then eventually in time, not only does he leave differently, but they leave differently too. A lot of people don't know this when you think about David and Goliath. I'm sure most of you, maybe all of you, know the story of David and Goliath. That Goliath was this huge man. He was a giant. He was battle hardened. He had brothers. He had 4 brothers. When you read that story and you think about this, that David stood before him with 5 stones. Some people say, well, I wonder why he brought 5 stones. Well, I don't think it's because he thought he was going to miss the first time. I'd rather bring 4 more because, who knows? The guy's a big target. If you can't hit him, you got bigger issues. I think he brought 4 more stones in case his brothers stepped up. But you know who took care of his brothers? Some of those men that went in that cave with him, that when they went in, they were in debt, in distress, and discontent. And when they came out, they were courageous just like him. When you step away to that cave, that hiding place, there's 2 questions you have to ask yourself. Because eventually you won't be alone anymore. Here's the first question is, who's in here with me? And the second question is, who am I listening to? So many times in that dark place, if we're not careful, we'll become vulnerable to the wrong voices. They begin to speak to us and begin to say things, and they may even be well-meaning and well-intended, but they could be deceived too. Maybe they're not supposed to listen to you. Maybe they're not supposed to listen to them. Maybe they're supposed to listen to you. Maybe you're the voice they need, even though you're in the cave too. So many times in these places we can just feel so alone or even abandoned, and then when people begin to show up because we feel that way, then automatically we just open ourselves up to anything. When at times God may look at us and say, even though you're in a rough place, I still need your voice in the lives of other people. So we need that place to hide, and we begin to hide in God's presence because that's the place that we find rest. But here's the thing I've discovered, that in that season of life that none of us like, that none of us enjoy, none of us look forward to, that in that cave that there's a work that's being done in us that prepares us for that season that we've always longed for. I shared with you before, when I was in my early 20s, I went through depression, and I'll tell you right now, I do not believe that God put depression on me. But I will tell you that there was a work that went in me while I was in the middle of that, and that is that the compassion that I had for people that went through depression themselves changed. I no longer viewed people that went through depression as somebody just feeling sorry for themselves, because I knew what it was like to have no reason at all to feel sad and not want to be in that place and not be able to do anything about it seemingly. But because of shame and embarrassment, I didn't share my story. And I made a decision. I said, Lord, if you ever bring me out of this, I'll tell people there's hope. And the first thing you have to do is remove the shame that you carry maybe because of that and begin to pursue it. And then there was another time, I remember we were doing student ministry, and we're building this facility in the community, and instead of people celebrating like I thought they would, man, there was this onslaught of just criticism. And I was, in many ways, just way too sensitive to it. It just wounded me much more than it should have. And there were times I was like, man, Lord, I don't want to stay here. I want to leave this place, and I want to go. And as we continued to build, and then finally got it built, that it would go over and over again, and it would just wound me. And I found myself trying to pursue every tongue, trying to pursue every voice that was critical. But the whole time He was doing a work in me, even though the criticism wasn't of Him. And He was trying to teach me that sometimes in leadership, you just have to begin to move forward. And you can't be deaf to the voices around you, because some of them may have your best interests at heart. But you can't allow it to deter you from what God has called you to do. I began to embrace Isaiah 54:17 that says this: no weapon formed against you will prosper, and every tongue that rises against you in judgment that He will condemn, because this is the heritage of the servant of the Lord. And so what happens is we go into that place one way and we come out another. We come out changed. If you've been driven to that cave today, and maybe you're at the very beginning of it where you feel just alone and abandoned, the thing you have to do is you have to begin again to seek God's help, to seek His presence, because in that moment that's where you find rest, and begin to hear His voice, and He'll speak to you. Maybe you've been in there long enough that other people have began to show up. And so who's in there with you? And who's doing the talking? Who should be? Because don't lose sight of this, that the cave is not a permanent dwelling place. You're there for a while. And if you'll listen to the right voices, and if you'll be the voice that God needs you to be, and when you come out on the other side, that whatever work He needed to do in you while you were in there, you'll be like, I've grown. And it was all to prepare you for this next thing that He has for you. Number two is this: when we go into that place one way and we come out another, we do this thing, so many times what takes place in that cave is just connected to just our routine and what takes place. We started Growth Track, and part 2 of Growth Track, which is the second week of each month, we talk about Bible study and all those things just to get us in good habits, healthy habits from what takes place spiritually. And so many times in our lives, we need things like that to either show us how to do it, or to remind us, or to keep us accountable. So for those of you that are in that cave, don't get discouraged. Don't quit. Don't give up. Ask God what your role is here, what your voice should be here. And don't be afraid to lean on those that He's placed in there with you, but know who you're leaning on. We go into that place one way and we come out another. Let's look at point number 3 and we'll close with this. Now let's go to Mark 6. I was so excited about this, I put it first. Anyway, Mark 6. How many of you believe that? Anyway, Mark 6 is the second book of the New Testament. You got Matthew and then Mark. Mark was he was a Jesus follower, and so this is an eyewitness account. Many people think this was the first gospel that was written, and that really what we believe is that Peter actually kind of like dictated this to Mark while he wrote it down. So Mark 6, verse 30. Mark 6, verse 30. Now, Jesus, in a few chapters earlier, had sent the disciples, he'd sent them out to ministry, sent them out by twos, and he told them, he said, look, he said, I want you to go in this place, I want you to do this thing, I want you to deal with, cast out evil spirits and all that kind of stuff. I want you to heal the sick, I want you to preach the gospel to them and talk to them. So they went away and they were ministering. Everybody say ministering. So they were doing good stuff, right? They were doing all these good things, and then yet they come back, and when they come back in verse 30, it says this, the apostles returned to Jesus from their ministry tour. Their ministry tour, they weren't out robbing 7-Elevens. They weren't, just hanging out or anything like that. They were doing good stuff, and they came back from their ministry tour and told him all they had done and taught. Then Jesus said, let's go off by ourselves. Let's go off by ourselves. Come away with me. Let's go off by ourselves to a quiet place and rest a while. He said this because there were so many people coming and going that Jesus and His apostles didn't even have time to eat. So they left by boat for a quiet place where they could be alone. Everybody say alone. So he gave them this invitation. Man, you guys have been doing great things. They told him about all the stuff that they had done, all the ministry that had taken place, all the things that they'd seen happen. And they said, man, let's go. Come away with me. Get away from the crowd for just a little bit of time. Get away from all the distraction and all the noise in your life. Come away with me for just a little while. And it says that they left. In other words, to do that, they had to be willing that for that moment, in that period, to just leave some things. To just step away. In my parents' generation, as they were growing up, because they dealt with the depression and that kind of thing, all these economic issues, that they were very intentional about where they put their money. But man, they would serve like nobody's business. And when I first got in student ministry, one of the things they would have in there is they would say, look, you've got to put together a youth service every Wednesday night. Okay, I can do that. And you need to come up with at least one activity, one social activity a month. Okay, I can do that. And so when I first got in student ministry, then that was a big deal. We'd do the activity, we would set it up, and we'd have tons of students show up. But as time went on, the activities began to be harder and harder to fill. And it wasn't because they weren't better. Matter of fact, they got better as time went on because we had more resources to do stuff. But something began to happen to our calendar, and that is that as life went on, things began to change. I mean, you guys know, especially if you have kids, I mean, it's like, you never know what's going to take place on Saturday morning. You never know what's going to happen on Sunday. You never know what's going to take place on Monday. I mean, it's what I notice is that our generation will write you a check quickly. Many more times will they do that quickly than give you time. And it's not because they're selfish with their time. It's because they don't have any. And so we get busy with all of this noble stuff, all of this good stuff, all of these things that are worthwhile. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be. I think one of the calls of Christians is to be a presence and a voice in their community, to be a presence and a voice in our family, at our jobs. I think we're called to be that. I think we're called to engage and make our world better. One of the reasons why I believe that we're called to fix up this place is because I think it'll lift this into town. And so it'll be one of the things that we'll do for our community. But I think we're called to do that. But even with doing all of that, the thing we have to understand is that there's still this invitation that the Lord has. After He watches us do all this good stuff, after He watches us impact the people that we work with, that we live with, that we go to school with, and as He rejoices in that with us, that at some point there's this invitation where He's like, let's just get away. Just for a short period of time. You just for this short period of time, here's this invitation, the same invitation he gave to them. He said, let's go off by ourselves, just me and you. I've had that sense before, that nudge where He's like, Rick, just turn off the TV for just a little bit. Just talk to me. Let me talk to you. Rick, put down your phone for just a little bit. Get off social media for just a little while. Just for the next couple hours, let's just spend time together. And so many times with that, it's just so easy for me to just kind of ignore that voice and say, I will, just give me a little bit more time. But time goes by and that window is shut, and then it seems like I've got to wait for another break before. But there is this ongoing invitation by Jesus where He says, let's just me and you. Let's just for right now, let's turn the rest of the world off for the next 15 minutes, for the next 30 minutes, for the next hour. Let's just turn the rest of the world off and you just talk to me for a little bit and let me talk to you. I want to refresh you. I want to instruct you. I want to help you. I want to warn you. I don't want you to fall into any traps or to be sucked in. I want to reveal to you. I want to share with you. And it's this ongoing invitation, this Jesus saying, let's get away. I know when I was in my 20s and I was working at a ministry, and on the inside of me there was a stirring because I was feeling called to student ministry, and I didn't really know, what am I supposed to do? How's that supposed to happen, Lord? I don't see any way that those doors will open, how that will become available. And I was so frustrated. And so I remember just talking to him about that. And finally, I just realized, I thought, this really is a big deal to me. So I've got to set aside something. So I remember we had this little room at work that you could, because it was at a ministry, I could go in and pray at my lunchtime. We had 45 minutes. So a lot of times I'd go out and eat with the guys I worked with. But I just started bringing just this sandwich. And I would eat a sandwich, and I would go into that room, and I would just spend the next 30, 35 minutes just praying about the future that God had for me. And there was a verse, Jeremiah 33:3, and it says this, call unto me, and I will answer you and show you great and mighty things which you know not. And I was able to, no longer was I walking around with this frustration of like, this will never happen. But all of a sudden, I just began to be encouraged that just because I don't see a way doesn't mean that God doesn't have a way, or that He's not making a way. And there was something that took place in that time as I responded to that invitation of just get away with me. Just for a little while. And these guys, when they got away with Jesus, they went to that place. They didn't stay there forever. Life wouldn't allow it. It wasn't God's plan because He wanted them to get back out into the world that He'd called them to be light in. But even these guys, when they came back and they shared all of these ministries, all these good deeds that they were doing, and Jesus looked at them and He said, let's get away. Let's get away. Number 3 is this, is that Jesus gives us this ongoing invitation to get alone with Him. And we get invited to stuff all the time, right? Birthday parties, especially got kids, birthday parties, baby showers, when the holidays get here, Christmas parties, work things, games. And all of them are noble and worthy and all that kind of stuff. But I have to ask myself, what carries more weight? What would carry more weight than just the whisper of God to say, let me invite you to spend just some time with me for just a little while. You'll have to say no to a couple of other things. And maybe it's not no to anybody specifically, but just whatever it is that you're doing right now, just get away with me. Sometimes I can get so busy in life that I even become unaware of the Lord's invitation. I got so many things going on. And finally, when I slow down, it's kind of like He's saying, hey, I've been trying to get your attention. So here's a question we have to ask ourselves. Don't answer this out loud because I'm asking me too. Not just you, I'm asking me. When is the last time we responded to the Lord's invitation? Hey, in one sense, you could maybe say this morning because there were other things I could be doing today and I'm here. That's true, I get it. But what about that invitation where He just says, let's just me and you get along? There's something about that place where we find rest. There's something about that place that becomes a place of safety. There's something about that place where He begins to speak to us. We get clarity in our lives and the direction we're supposed to go. That we get wisdom. That He helps us in that moment to know what it is that we're supposed to do. There's something we find in that place we can't find anywhere else. And it's just this regular, you're doing good. That's so cool what happened. It's so cool what's going on, but you're just so busy right now. Let's just get away. Jesus gives us this ongoing invitation to get alone with Him. It's one of those places that He refreshes us. I want you to do this. I want you to bow your heads and close your eyes for just a minute. And even though you're here in front of all of these people, that they're in your heart, in the King James, Psalms 91 says this, He that dwells in the secret place of the Most High. And the reason why it's secret is because only you and God really know what's taking place there in your heart. Because you could be bowing your heads and closing your eyes and thinking about anything but Him. Or with chaos all around you, you could bow your heads and close your eyes and just secretly be telling Him how much you love Him. And He could be speaking to you about your world and about relationships and about what He has for you.